As you heard, my name is Blair Robertson. Here's a wee bit about who I am, in case you're wondering. I've been a parish minister, I've been a healthcare chaplain, I've been a chaplaincy manager, I've done a fair degree of training, education over the years within chaplaincy. I now do pastoral supervision for clergy, healthcare professionals, and that's been mentioned in some workshops too, supervision. And my full-time job though is running a guest house in Elgin. So if I fall asleep, it's because I left the home at 5:30 this morning. I came by train. I can sleep going home. What I want to do in the next hour is introduce to you some of the content from the section I wrote in the publication you've all got. I'm going to invite you to do some thinking and reflecting together on the subject of relationships and separation. And we'll consider how individuals and church communities can care for people in their relationships. And when we're talking about relationships, we're thinking mainly of people's most significant intimate relationships, but also within the context of the spectrum of all human relationships. So, in a minute or two, I'll ask you to talk to each other, because I'd like to think about this. What have you learned, what are you learning now about relationships from your family of origin? Think back to the family you grew up in and your parents perhaps. You know, which emotions were okay in your house? Which emotions weren't okay? What you learned, are you learning about relationships from your church? Maybe your own particular congregation or the church at large. The church at large saying some sorts of relationships are fine, others are not so fine. The church has all these big important words about relationships. Big important words. But what's the reality? What have you learned from the Bible about relationships? Are there any stories, any verses that come to mind and you go, yes, that's what I learned, that's important to me? And what about contemporary culture? What's changed in your lifetime perhaps? What's changing now in culture about relationships? So have we chat about that, but also notice where there are what I call dissonances and congruences. In other words, where they're the same and where they're different. Dissonances, maybe, you know, where the family you brought up and said one thing, but the Bible said another. Or where Bible teaching and contemporary culture now seems to be overlapping and is congruent. Notice those things if you can and just ask the questions. What about that? What about that? It's quite a large remit, isn't it? Just to get you talking and thinking about what have you learned about relationships in your life under these different headings. So if you can do that for maybe 6 or 7 minutes, just in groups of 3, 4, 5, even just turn your seats around a wee bit and just chat for 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, and I'll bring you to a halt. Lots of buzz, lots of noise, that's really good, well done, thank you for doing that. Just quite briefly, from your conversations and your listening, any headlines, anything that you heard said you went, ooh, or anything you said and you went, oh, did I just say that? Any headlines?
Strong family.
Strong family? Yeah.
We felt also less communication on the more contemporary culture now because of the way of communications.
Right, right.
Maybe the loss of a family meal at tea
Okay.
time. So news is not being shared on family members.
Relationships via Twitter or something. the Twitter machine, yeah. Ah, indeed. Anything else?
Families don't live near one another sometimes now,
Yeah.
as they used to do.
Yes, yes, that's right. They're all dispersed. Uh-huh.
Relationships can often be in a state of flux.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
There are so many changes. I mean, in the modern world, relationships fall apart. There's consequences
Yes,
throughout
yes.
the families.
Yeah, yeah.
Church family can bind people together.
Indeed, indeed.
So it's worthwhile from that aspect.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed.
A more relaxed church.
A more relaxed church, right? Yes, so there's more scope for relationships, getting to know people. Yeah, yeah. That's really lovely, because I think pastoral care in congregations only happens if we're prepared to speak to each other, you know, and be with each other. Yeah. Anything else? Last chance.
What we expect from a relationship has changed enormously.
Right.
We were talking about getting married and who does the housework?
Yes, indeed, indeed. Yeah. Up for grabs now, isn't it? Yes. Good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Here's some things about relationships. It is not good to be alone. Way back to Genesis, the creation of humankind by God. And God says it is not good for humankind to be alone, for man to be alone. So God then made woman. But we are social creatures. As human beings, we function best in relationships. We're made to be relating, to be social. We discover who we are. Our identity is formed within relationships. We flourish or we don't flourish in relationships. But I guess if we weren't in healthy relationships, we'd be pretty stunted as people. The old French philosopher René Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am," in one sense got it wrong. You won't have much of a sense of who I am unless you've got others around you as well. We discover the I am, with other people. We need each other. And the human race, of course, needs intimate relationships. We need sexual relationships for the human race to continue, don't we? So human relationships are important. And Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? And he said, to love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and love your neighbour as well as you do yourself. 3 dimensions of love. Love for God, love for others, and love for ourselves. And they're interwoven. How we love ourselves will shape how we love other people. How we love God might shape how we love other people and how we love ourselves. It's all interwoven. And of course, one of those, classically, if you're in the helping professions, we're bad at loving ourselves. Who's at the self-care workshop this morning? We talked about that, didn't we? Caring for self, loving ourselves. And our most significant relationships are holy ground. Holy ground. We tread with care. Take off your shoes. That's why it's so important when we get involved with people and their relationships. We tread carefully. It's so easy to cause huge hurt, huge offence. People's relationships are sacred to them. In the article in the publication, I give the example of a teenager coming home and talking about, their first love, their first crush to their parents. Parents have to tread very carefully, don't they? Whoa, that's holy ground. Say the wrong thing and you've got a teenager storming off, haven't you? So I've heard, I'm not a parent. But yeah, relationships are holy ground. So we take off our shoes. We tread carefully. You're walking on eggshells. You can't walk on eggshells with big clackety boots on. Mixing metaphors, but you get the point. And also, taking off your shoes is one of the first steps in empathy. Because then you can begin to walk in someone else's shoes. Think about it. And relationships are incubators for the growth of the fruits of the Spirit. It's in our relationships as Christian folk, as people of Christian faith, that the reality, the hard reality of the teachings of the faith and the fruits of the Spirit and letting them flourish come real. How will these fruits be shown in our lives and our relationships? It's possible in our relationships. What are the fruits of the Spirit? Give me one. Love. Give me another. Patience. Give me another. Joy. Self-control. Another one. Faithfulness. Another one. Yep, that's them all there. Well done. Think about your own most significant relationships with your children, with your partner, your spouse. Bad jings. The proverbial hits the fan, doesn't it, at times? Patience. Patience, self-control. You know, I do believe that in every moment of living, we have to take responsibility for the relationship that we're in. When we're with another person, moment by moment, we have to take responsibility for it and let these fruits flourish in our lives. To be patient, to be kind, to be generous, moment by moment by moment. Easy, eh? Easy, easy. So, another thing to chat about. Look back in your life, please, and recall people whose relationships you admired. Perhaps a couple who were together for many, many years. I remember someone I met in the parish years ago, and they were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. And he said to me, oh, the many times over the years, Blair, I could have killed her. But I couldn't have lived without her. Says a lot, doesn't it? So think about somebody, a couple who have been through a lot together, maybe endured a lot, but who have qualities in their relationship, or a family who've endured much, maybe through adversity. What are the qualities of their relationships that you admire and give thanks to God for? Just reflect on that for a couple of minutes and speak to your immediate neighbour about that if you can, please. I've often wondered if in congregations where there might be, a few young couples planning to get married that are known about, would it be possible to find, a couple of folk in the congregation who've been married for those 60 years, and just to share with those younger couples something of their life together and what's made their marriage work for them? It could be fascinating for folk in their early 20s to chat to folk in their 80s about marriage and relationships and bringing a family up.
They wouldn't believe that, but...
Yes, It's a wee seed to drop in there, worth thinking about. Any headlines from those conversations? Faithfulness. Forgiveness. Yeah. Trust. Yeah. Non-judgmental. Yeah.
Compromise.
Yeah. Yes. You've heard the old joke about, a bit of marriage guidance, saying to the couple, the advice is, after every argument, after every dispute, have the last word. No matter what's happening, you must have the last word. And the last word is, yes, dear. Compromise, yeah. I tremble sometimes when I read 1 Corinthians 13, where it says, love keeps no record of wrongs. Yeah. And how many times do folks say, you're doing it again? But love keeps no record of wrongs. We don't tot it up, you know. Any other headlines?
Sense of humour.
Sense of humour, yeah. To laugh at ourselves, first of all, perhaps. Yeah, yeah. Indeed. It's all about how to communicate well, isn't it? A book that might be of interest, or you might know it, Gary Chapman, the 5 love languages.
Yes.
And he talks about having to understand the language we speak for our most significant relationships, how we talk about these things, how we show these things, how these things are couched in our language, but also understanding how our partner speaks about these things or demonstrates these things, what their language is for love. So you can communicate well. So you can communicate. Receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service or devotion, physical touch, understanding what your partner will understand you're wanting to say to them. For example, I had to think about this one. For example, you might say to your partner, "Come and watch a movie with me," because it's quality time. It's quality time. Let's watch a movie together. But your partner's thinking, "I hate movies." Not another movie. But the partner does it to satisfy him. So whose needs really are met? The man was thinking, "I'm doing this as an act of love." In fact, it's now happening just to keep him quiet. She'd rather go for a long walk in the countryside. That would be her quality time. But his quality time is watching a movie. Learn what the other person needs and learn to speak the language. That's what Gary Chapman's saying there. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Good. You've read it. He's got a new book out called God Knows Your Love Language. I think it's on the bookshop shelf there. Quote from Richard Rohr, one of the most recent writers on spirituality and faith. I think most people are called to marriage because we need at least one other person to be like a mirror for us, to reflect our best self and our worst self in a way that we can receive. The interesting thing about a mirror is that it doesn't change the image. It simply takes it in as it is. Our closest friends or life partner hold a mirror up to us, revealing our good side and our dark side, and reminding us that we still haven't really learned to love. That's what every healthy relationship does. When we fall in love, we fall into an infinite mystery. I find that quite sobering, but quite true. You know, our relationships, yes, are holy ground. They're also mysteries, sacred mysteries. The biggest mystery being, why would this other person choose to be with me and love me? My goodness, that's a mystery. But because relationships are mysteries, even to those who are in them, looking on from outside, how can we know what it's about at all as a third party? People's relationships are mysteries to us as outsiders and to those folk in them too very often. That's why being non-judgmental is very important too. Reminding us that we still haven't really learned to love. We're works in progress, aren't we? Works in progress. Of course, relationships will go through difficult times. The mirror might get cracked. The holy ground might suffer an earthquake, and people fall and stumble. Relationships do sadly come to an end. People separate, people divorce. I don't know if you know this book by John O'Donoghue, Benedictus, A Book of Blessings. He has a really interesting blessing for the breakup of a relationship. And here's 2 sections from it. Love can seldom end clean, for all the tissue is torn and each lover turned stranger is dropped into a ruin of distance where emptiness is young and fierce. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. Amazing poetry, I find. That first few lines describing the end of a relationship in starkness, isn't it? But also the blessing. Try as best you can. Don't lose all sense of yourself. Relationships do come to an end. How can we offer pastoral care when relationships break down? Of course, within a church congregation, sometimes relationships, marriages come to an end and we only hear about it a long time after the event because we've not been saying to folk, we've not seen you at church for a while, is everything okay? Folk just stopped coming. What can we do with pastoral care when relationships are under difficulty or come to an end? The first thing is be accepting of what is happening. In other words, don't judge. Don't pass judgment. The last thing folk want to hear when they're going through a difficult time is judgment. Try not to tell people what they should or should not be feeling. We've all done it, haven't we? We've said to folk, oh, don't feel that way. Well, you shouldn't be thinking that. You shouldn't be feeling that. Well, people are feeling that. People are thinking that. We have to accept it. We have to accept the reality of what has actually happened and not try and make it into something different for people by saying, don't feel that way, don't think that way. Accept what's happening. Try not to take sides. We'll never know the whole story. We might be tempted to take sides with one person feeling they've been totally wronged in it all, but we don't know the whole story. Try to be equal in the friendship to both partners if possible. And it's not our job to fix anything. We might want to rush in there and try and patch things up or create reconciliation if you can create reconciliation. But as someone offering pastoral care, offering compassion and support, it's not our job to fix anything. People who try and fix things sometimes are simply called meddlers, yes? It's not our job to fix anything. So feeling helpless is okay. Feeling helpless is okay. Sometimes saying to folk who are going through a hard time, simply, what can I do to help at the moment? Is there anything at all? To show you're available is enough. Remember that while the world may be collapsing for some people, normal life is going on. Normal life does go on around people, and we're part of that normal life for those folk. To be that friend still, to be that good neighbour still, to be the person who asks how they're doing still, to be a bit of the normal life. Be aware of your own feelings and opinions and try to bracket them off as best you can. Maybe as we hear the story of why a relationship came to an end, we're feeling really angry about something. Oh, you know, it can be okay to say, gosh, what you're telling me makes me feel angry. But don't get angry. You know, because who are you getting angry with? Be aware of your own feelings. Yes, disappointment, yes, sadness, but deal with them carefully. When I've done training with students over the years in the hospital in pastoral care, I've always tried to teach folk the difference between reacting and responding. Someone tells you something and you feel this thing bubbling up inside you and you react. It's kind of in the moment stuff. Where to be a bit more self-aware, to take a step back and just take time to respond creatively and appropriately is much better. Reactions can sometimes cause damage or consequences. A careful response, grounded from us, from our own grounding, will be a response probably grounded in compassion and love and support. Above all, listen. Listen. Be prepared to listen and to pray. These are my thoughts about pastoral care at a time of relationships coming to an end, but they're true of so many other situations when we might be involved in pastoral care. Any of these surprise you or want to add to any of them? Yeah.
What about in abusive relationships? That one, try not to take sides, it's very difficult.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's maybe the exception to that. If we know someone has been abused in a relationship, emotionally, physically, sexually, we have to say, you've been wronged. This should not have happened. People who have been in abusive relationships very often will feel it is their fault, that they've done something wrong, and that they deserved it. We can say, you did not deserve it. Without getting into the whole messiness of the situation, no one deserves physical, emotional, sexual abuse. No one deserves that. It's always wrong. And we can stand up and say that. It is always, always wrong. And know about places to signpost people to. Know your local women's aid. Know your local relate counsellors, etc., etc. Thank you for mentioning that. I want to also talk about how to work with children. Not because I'm an expert, but because I think children often are a wee bit overlooked when their mums and dads are going through relationship breakdowns and divorce. Children will be affected by what their parents are going through. It stands to reason. They will be affected in some way. Sometimes adults will be saying, oh, they're doing really, really well. They're not affected at all. Children will be affected in some way. Children, of course, often can't find the words to talk about what they're feeling. They've not got the language yet. They've got difficult emotions, so it comes out in difficult behaviour, and that's requiring of you as a Sunday school teacher patience, or whatever your role is. And maybe if there's children you're working with in the church and their behaviour is changing, it could be because something's happened at home that you need to ask quietly about. What's happening at home? Is all okay? How are mum and dad? Children need to be reassured that what has happened is not their fault. They didn't make it happen. It's about mum and dad. It's not their fault. And children need to be reassured also that they still matter and they are of value. If children and adults, we all do it, beat themselves up and say we're not worth anything, nobody likes me, I'm valueless, it's a difficult road to start going down. Children must be told, you still matter. You're important in this congregation. You matter to God. You matter to us. And the familiar is important. Youth organisations, coming to church, whatever it is kids are involved in, it's important they keep involved in those things as far as possible. And important they have trustworthy adults in the church That's us. And their friends and routine. That normality thing again. There's probably much more experience in the room about this. Any thoughts on that?
You mentioned children might not have the words.
Yeah.
One of the things that anybody working with simple violence Sunday school, particularly what they draw
Yes.
and
Yes.
how they interact with play with things
Yeah.
will also maybe be indicators of the aggression or the annoyance or the upset that's
Yes. Yes.
being experienced.
Very helpful.
Words, but it could be in a more
Yeah.
tangible way.
The colours they use in their pictures, what they draw, indeed, yes.
The doll has been taken apart,
Yes.
separated into no longer playing with mum and dad, but just one, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. That's really helpful.
Also, in the process of finding out because of difficult behaviours, it's good to know when you don't sound like you're crying,
Yes. Yes.
so they don't go back home and say to parents, I was asked this, and then parents start feeling like you're crying too.
Yeah. That's right. One of my models for pastoral care is the open hands. That when we're involved in pastoral care, we receive into our hands what the other person or the other people place there. So when we ask questions, we only ask questions of what's been placed in our hands, and that way we never pry. So if a child is behaving differently, we see that's in our hands. We can say, you're not quite yourself today. You know, normally you're kind of smiley, but you're not so smiley today. That's wrong. You know, so we never go beyond what's been placed in our hands through the person speaking to us or what we can see for ourselves. When I used to train students in the chaplaincy, they had this great fear of asking, nosy questions, prying questions. And I would say, you're fine. So long as you don't ask anything that's not been given to you, you'll be fine. And if there's cards up in the room, the ward, you can always say who the card's from because they're there. But the open hands, ready to receive what's given to us and just to wonder what it's all about with people. Is that helpful?
Presumably this also applies to the breakdown of relationships between adults.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you've got this line that says, don't try and fix it, but obviously if they're not asking you to fix it,
Indeed.
then that's true, but they may come to you and say, we're having problems, we're thinking of separating, can you just help us?
Yes.
Then obviously you go for it.
Then you go for it and you say, I'd love to help you. Tell me the story.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
One at a time.
One at a time, yes.
Interruption.
Yes. Yeah. Hear the story. I mean, you talked about hearing stories this morning, and that's very much it. Often folk find a solution for themselves just because they get a chance to talk about what's happening to them. And they get to the point of going, oh, it's all about this, isn't it? Yes.
I think it's often the idea, though, of we are often fixers.
Yes.
And it's often this idea of holding it.
Yeah.
It's not the idea of actually sorting it. It's just allowing the people to share and allowing
Yes.
people
Yes.
to express without actually going.
That's right.
And that's a difficult thing sometimes for
Yeah.
us who are solution focused.
Yes. Yes. When I was talking about my previous world as a chaplain, I get folk coming to my office and telling me the most amazing stories, and I sit there and listen. And after 45 minutes, I'd often say, wow, that's been a big, big thing you've told me. What's it been like to tell me all that stuff? And they go, what a relief. It's been a huge relief. And often that's all it takes. Folk to tell the story and feel, what a relief to talk about it. That's the beginnings of pastoral care. Okay, how about the church and all of this? Church community, church life. Here's a list. In my congregation, in your congregation, there are married people, divorced people, single people, people in same-sex relationships, people exploring their sexuality and or their gender identity, people in abusive relationships, single parents, couples with children, couples who cannot have children, people who have lost a baby or a child, believers and doubters, workers unemployed and retired, people with chronic illnesses, people with disabilities, combinations of all of the above, the parents, grandparents, friends of the above, and more. They're all there. They're all there in some form or another. So if you are a worship leader or a person writing prayers, they're all there. What do you say? What do you pray that somehow lets folk feel they're included? And that church belongs, they belong in the church. And let's be honest, as congregations get older, it's going to be largely those folk perhaps. The parents, grandparents of all of those. I think every person who leads worship ought to have a list like that above the desk in their study. I'm writing a sermon or writing your prayers. Just glance up. Yep, they're here. How do I speak with these people here in front of me? So how can the church do useful things in terms of relationships, endings and beginnings? First of all, I really do believe that worship is corporate pastoral care. A minister might see 5, 6 folk during the week visiting at home or in hospital or in the manse. But on Sunday, there might be 40, 50, if you're lucky, 100 plus folk in the pews. The values of pastoral care in the one-to-one relationship of empathy and listening and compassion can be present in the pulpit and behind the table as well. Worship can be corporate pastoral care. When did you last hear or preach a sermon on marriage, or on divorce, or on lots of other things perhaps, money? I've been a preacher now for almost 30 years. I don't preach every Sunday now, but I have never preached a sermon on marriage. I've given homilies and re-addresses at weddings, but I've never done a sermon on marriage or divorce. I've alluded to marriage and relationships in sermons, of course I have, but I've never actually tackled it head on. Why? I don't know. I think people would appreciate it. Folk in the pews, maybe ourselves, would appreciate hearing someone think about relationships in a serious, biblically based, creative way. In our worship, in our preaching, in our prayers, do we use the language of grace or guilt? Grace or guilt? How do we want people to feel in our worship? Guilty, or that they've encountered grace? What ceremonies does the church need to support people in their relationships, beginnings and ending? We have marriage blessings. What else could the church offer to folk for relationships? Maybe folk are getting remarried after, not to the same partner, but to other partners after a divorce. Can the marriage ceremony carefully acknowledge the past, the hurt, the pain of the past, and this new beginning? It's very Christian to talk about hurts, pain, and new beginnings, resurrection, hope. Can we start with where people are at in our liturgies and our ceremonies, and bring into a liturgical, theological worship context the lives they're actually living, and not the lives we'd like them to be living? What would a visitor learn from your congregation about how Christians relate to each other? Taking the context a bit wider. What behaviours would a visitor see in your congregation? People happy to see each other? What's seen, what's not seen? What are the norms and the assumptions in your congregation about relationships? The congregation I had many years ago said that they were a friendly congregation, and they were on the whole. But one Sunday, there was a group of folk there, and they were in fact doing drama in the service. But afterwards, over tea and coffee, I saw this group of folk in the corner of the hall, just on their own. And I said to them, because they're staying at the manse, did anybody actually speak to you after the service? No, they said. We did a bit in the service, in the worship, we had tea or coffee, but no one came to speak to us. The following Sunday, I said to the congregation, last Sunday we had visitors here. You know them. I asked them, did they enjoy meeting you? And they said to me, nobody spoke to them. And you tell me you're a friendly congregation. Last Sunday, you weren't. Let's name it. Let's name it. What kind of behaviours do we see or not see in our congregations? What can we aspire folk to be embodying in their relationships? So, there's a challenge for you. Questions, and thank you for listening. Any questions? Stunned you into silence. Yeah, thank you.
I think one of my questions goes back to the question you asked us all earlier about young couples being able to share relationships with older couples.
Yeah.
And I think, if I picture it correctly, that learning was going in one direction. And my question for you is, what can we learn from a younger generation who approach relationships in a completely different way? How is it possible for us to relate to other generations and other people who shape their relationships very differently than perhaps we have been culturally brought up to understand?
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good question. Thank you for that. I think the starting point has to be kind of openness, an openness to learn. You know, if there's a same-sex couple in your congregation, you know, and maybe there's kind of, ooh, don't know what to make of all of this, go and speak to them. Great to see you here. Thank you for being in church. Welcome. You know, folk going through a divorce or separation, find out what's not been going right. You know, openness to learn, openness to be alongside folk, and to make real those big words the church has about relationships of compassion and trust and forgiveness and togetherness and community. Yes?
Why do you think we don't preach about divorce and marriages a lot in church?
Maybe some folk do. I know I haven't, and I've never heard a sermon on those topics in all my years of going to church. I think preachers, I'll say I'm a preacher, do preach on occasions, tend to shy away from some difficult topics. You know, kind of scared what people might say. Having said that, you know, because of the work I did in my former life, I would often preach about illness, suffering, and death in my sermons. And afterwards, people said to me, "Oh, we don't hear enough of that." Interesting, but yeah.
I'm just thinking in the context of families living apart, but for a lot of people, immediate family is the church family.
Yes.
And what we're trying to do, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, is getting all the generations together. That can be really quite difficult. And I'm just wondering for inspiration in people's ideas of how we do that.
Yeah. Church is one of the few places around where people of different generations do mix together. You know, it's possible in church on a Sunday to have toddlers, maybe if you're lucky, teenagers, a few 20-year-olds, and then older. But it's hard to find anywhere else where you'll find that generational mix. And that's wonderful, isn't it? It's wonderful. When I was living in Glasgow, my partner and I were invited to the 70th birthday party of our church elder. a good few years ago now, and we were delighted to be invited to Philip's 70th birthday party in our house. And we told our neighbours, and our neighbour went, "Oh, a 70-year-old's birthday party." No, we're thrilled to be going. We're thrilled that as folk in their early 40s at that point, we were being invited. It's lovely. It's lovely to be there.
So how do we get the generations more together,
Yeah.
rather than just being in the same building together?
Yes, yeah,
That's where it gets difficult. I
yes,
think,
yeah.
right?
Yes, at the back.
Yeah, I can answer that a little bit. There's a great book called Spiritual Styles,
Mhm.
and it looks at kind of the fact that in churches we often group together in ages, but actually it works really well if you group together in what your spiritual style is. So some people are about active justice in their community. That's what their Christianity is to them. Some people are about liturgy and what the service looks like,
Mhm.
and all those different things. And so actually sometimes what you can find is if you break into spiritual styles, you've got a 70-year-old, a 20-year-old and an 8-year-old that really like that spiritual style. And it's a really good way to get that intergenerational thing really working.
Great. And things like Message Church, I'm sure, are opportunities for people a bit older to be alongside young families and children as well, and doing things together.
We
Yeah.
have a party at Christmas,
Right?
and all the age groups come, and they play all the old-fashioned games and things.
Lovely. Yeah.
It's really grown.
Mhm.
It's really something,
Great.
yeah.
Great.
In my church, we've started hosting a once a month movie night, so a family movie, and all generations can attend, and also a monthly quiz night or games night. So we've had like the chase and all those kind of themes, and
Mhm.
that's been popular for everyone to come together in it.
Lovely. Lovely. 1 minute left. Any further questions or points?
We have the first Sunday of every month, we have a rock and roll service.
And you arrive on your motorbike and your leathers, don't you?
Yes, the part.
Great.
Being a status quo fan. But they on that Sunday morning, it's excellent because the kids come, they get cereals,
Right.
the adults get rolls and sausage, rolls and bacon,
Yeah.
and they sing the choruses that we used to sing.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's what's missing today, that the kids are not singing the choruses, they're not being taught through the choruses the Bible.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. On that point, thank you so much for your participation. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.